Hi everyone, my name is Tracey Benson and I am presenting a talk for the Alternative Reality Garden Symposium for Afi World, and the title of my talk is Weaving Relations. So Nara Nulam, hello everybody. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Joondaburri people, who are the traditional custodians of Yarun Bribie Island, where I live. And this is part of the Kabi Kabi Gubbi Gubbi Nation in southeast Queensland, where I live and work on the Australian continent. Well, actually, we're an island. I would also like to acknowledge elders past, present, and future leaders, and thank them for their deep knowledge and connection to these beautiful lands and waters over many, many thousands of years. I would also like to pay my respects to First Nations peoples in the audience. So the talk today explores a number of themes which I will hopefully weave together. And first of all, a bit of an introduction, and then I will delve into our relationship with the world of trees and plants. Also looking to focus a little bit on trees as story and also trees as ancestor. And then some exploration of collaboration with plants through my creative practice and collaborations with other people, human people. And then a number of projects I will discuss in short, in particular two recent projects which are weaving wetlands and passage. And then towards the end, I will wrap up by talking about the weaving water residency and symposium, of which Afi World is a partner. So who am I to speak for the trees? And that's a very interesting question, because I can only speak for myself, but I can speak about my relationship with the trees and what the trees have meant to the way that I understand and experience my existence on this planet. So who am I? I was born on Ningi Country, or part of Kabi Kabi Nation in Redcliffe, Queensland, and I grew up between there and Larrakia Country in Australia's top end in Darwin. Between then and now, I lived in New South Wales, Victoria, and 20 years in Ngunnawal Country in Canberra. Now I'm back on the lands of Kabi Kabi Nation, and I can actually see Redcliffe from the side of the island. I only need to walk 15 minutes and I can actually see the tip of Redcliffe from where I live. So this has been, in many ways, a big circle around for me, or a spiral, which is slowly spiraling out. In terms of my cultural affiliations, I am descendant from migrants who came to Australia from Norway, Ireland, England, and Germany. So my earliest ancestor came to these lands in the 1870s. So a little bit about where I live. This is Yarun Bribie Island. It is a small sand island. It's 8 kilometres wide at its widest point and 34 kilometres long. So as I mentioned, I've been back here for a little while. I came back in the beginning of last year to reconnect with family and support my parents. And that has been part of the story that I will tell you as well. So this is a place of saltwater and freshwater meeting, and it's a place of ancestors, of childhood memories and stories which reach back thousands of years and for me, a number of generations. So Bribie is the dugong because of the shape of the island. And a dugong is also known as a manatee or a sea cow. And they are a vulnerable species, and they thrive in the passage between the island and the mainland. So this area we're seeing here in the middle. So over 90% of the island on Yarun is national park, and the water surrounding it is a marine protected area. And so since moving to the island, my work as an artist has become very visceral and connected to the island, the ebbs and flows of the tides, the extremity of floods with the debris washing up on the southern points of the island after the floods early last year, and also the other climatic activities which go on where we live. So most recently, there were big burn-offs happening where we're doing backburning because we're looking into a big fire season, and that was actually quite a tense time for the local community. So while my story is really one about, you know, a small person on a small island, the water that flows in and around the island is much more expansive. So it connects us to Moreton Bay, a number of rivers which flow into the bay, and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the many other water bodies on this planet. And also it connects to the story of the plants. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we process through the slides. So one of the things that I'm concerned with is how we can act more consciously to honour and revere our connection between us as, you know, walking water bodies, and those relationships between us as water bodies and collaborators with the plant world, essential collaborators. We rely on each other for breath, is really the focus for the conversation today, as I seek to bring together some of these themes of, you know, deep time, science, culture, spirit, and an essence of place. So the island has many stories. Many of these stories go back thousands of years, but I will tell you some of the more recent stories here. So in the early 1860s, the traditional First Nation people's lives here really changed forever with the arrival of pastoralists and timber getters. And also Queensland's first Aboriginal reserve was located on Bribie Island near White Patch in 1877. So elderly people and those who did jobs for the settlers were given sugar and flour every day, and when fish were in short supply, they were given more flour. So that was a very poor exchange for the loss of access to their traditional lands, but it's not an unusual story for the different communities and countries on the Australian continent. Later, many people were moved from their traditional lands to other missions, and those who did stay on Bribie Island found work and adapted well to the radical change that was brought upon them. And many Aboriginal peoples living in and around Bribie Island still maintain very strong spiritual and cultural links with their traditional lands and waters. So in terms of the European history going back a bit further, Matthew Flinders visited Bribie Island in 1799 during his exploration of Moreton Bay. So his group came ashore at the southern end of Bribie Island, where they encountered the local Aboriginal people. So a brief confrontation took place due to a misunderstanding and ended with a spear being thrown and a musket being fired. And later on, Flinders named this point Skirmish. In 1823, John Oxley charted the Moreton Bay area and discovered the Brisbane River. It wasn't really discovered, it was always there with the help of some shipwrecked ex-convicts. Oxley later selected Brisbane as the site of a new penal settlement. So since that time, Bribie has accommodated varying uses, including grazing, a lighthouse, native timber harvesting, exotic plantations, resource extraction, beekeeping, quarantining, sand mining, and a fish cannery, and now more recently recreational pursuits. So there's many layers of stories to the story of Bribie. And as you can see in this picture, the trees that were taken from the island were massive. And I can only imagine what the island would have looked like in those days. So this is a more recent sort of snapshot of the island. The large photograph is on the coastal side of the island. This is Wurrum. And the photograph inset is from the passage side of the island with one of the magnificent trees that adorn the parkland area around the passage. So trees and relationship, as I mentioned, you know, we're in constant relationship with plants and trees, even if we're unaware of it. And also these plants and trees are in relationship with each other and all of the other species of plants and animals which form our ecosystems, including the fungus and the bacteria and all different kinds of things. So this is something that I try to be very mindful about in my practice when I'm thinking about how we're communicating with trees, that the trees are actually communicating with us in a way that is not necessarily open to our human way of experiencing the world, but it is there if you take the time to listen and observe. So I'm very interested in trees as being both storytellers and ways for us to tell our own creation stories. And there's many different creation stories that exist on this planet around the importance of trees and their relationship to our story. The one that is, I guess, that resonates most strongly for me is Yggdrasil, and the story of the world tree in Norse mythology. And this is really tied to my own work where I've explored my ancestral realms and connecting those in terms of how I'm understanding relationships to place and my own identity in relationship to how I exist on this place and how my generations before me viewed the world. So Yggdrasil, you know, famously as joins together the 9 Norse worlds, and Odin, one of the gods, hung from one of the branches of Yggdrasil's tree for 9 days, so he would be able to have access to the wisdom of the runes. And the runes are another motif which I have explored quite a bit in my work. So this tree and its story resonates for me, and I very much have drawn on those stories in some of the work that I've done in collaboration, and I'll talk about a little bit of that a bit later. You know, and trees have also been powerfully significant with the first peoples on the Australian continent and indeed here on the island. And one of the things that trees were known for was for places for women to give birth, or birthing trees. And the picture that you're seeing there is one of the Jarb Wurrung trees in Victoria, which was under threat due to expansion of the highway. And some of these trees are more than 1,000 years old. And I just wanted to read a quote that was written in a recent article. And quite often they were seen as cathedrals as well, these beautiful trees and churches. So the quote says, "That has made the church analogy very apt for supporters. After a fire devastated Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris in April, some commentators pointed out that the potential destruction of the jaburang trees, some of which are just as old as Notre Dame and hold deep cultural importance, have not prompted a similar outpouring of grief." So with the fire that happened in Notre Dame, a line of connection was made between, a point in time in a cultural history between, the significance of these trees and the significance of the church. Another thing that many trees have been used for, some of the ancient trees, is for, and they're called scar trees, is used for creating canoes and other implements, kulamon for gathering food, and these trees are very significant as well. This image is of a tree which was destroyed for firewood on a pastoralist property. And when that had been discovered by some of the Kaurna elders, they were devastated. So Jeff Newchurch, one of the elders, said, "It is highly significant to Kaurna and Aboriginal people with our sacred trees. Even though it is not a living tree, it is still living because it holds significant sacredness, and we're able to tell that story. It's been lying there for years and years. It's been laying there since white man first came up to settle. Suddenly an individual comes along and cuts it up for firewood." So it takes part in that opportunity to tell your story, to pass that education, that awareness, not only to our own people, but the wider community. And so for me, the relationship with some of these ancient trees on our continent is really about, how we value our cultures and our own stories of this place. And this is beyond European occupation. So for me, very valuable learnings and ways of connecting into place. So I would like to talk a little bit now about, trees as ancestor. And this tree is an ancient oak tree in Norway. And I spent 3 months in Norway on a project called Waters of the Past. And it really sort of emerged from a bigger project called Words for Water. And I spent 3 months in Norway really looking at my own family history and trying to understand my ancestors' journey from Norway to Australia and understanding some of those stories and also my own heritage and connection to those lands. So this tree is called the Grand Master, or the Great Master. One of the things that I found very tricky about spending time in Norway is trying to find those historical records. Now, I did find some things in the parish ledgers around my family, and I found my ancestral church in a village near Hurum, not far from where I was staying. And when I journeyed there, I spent some time in the church graveyard trying to find my relatives. And after spending half an hour looking at every single grave, I grew very despondent and sat under this great old tree and just sort of sat quietly and felt really despairing that I couldn't find a connection to my family. And then I realised that these huge old trees had actually witnessed the birth of some of my ancestors, the christenings, the weddings, the confirmations. They had known my ancestors and they had shared breath with my ancestors. And that really started me thinking about, you know, how important these relationships are and how trees bear witness, you know, sometimes to 20 or 30 generations of human existence on the planet, if not more. And really the project that set Waters of the Past in motion was a project that was part of Words for Water, and I was exploring the Mary River. And the Mary River is near Gympie, a bit further north from where I live. And this image there is, you know, the beautiful reflections of the trees on the water. But why the Mary was significant was because it was my grandmother's name. Her name was Mary. And that got me thinking about, you know, the water crossings that were undertaken and those connections to other places, and also the fact that Mary in particular was an avid gardener and really sort of drawn to plants and the plant world and nature. So much so that her and my grandfathers were members of the ancient order of Druids, which I found out a couple of years after she passed away. So I'd like to talk now a little bit about, you know, collaboration with plants and how plants and trees have actually been part of my creative practice in many ways. And one of the ways that that's happened is actually by creating works that have used eco-dye derived from plants that have been gathered, and actually creating eco-dyed fabric using recycled fabric and plywood and things like that. So using reclaimed fabric to create this imagery. And the work that you saw before was the beginning of what resulted in this work here, which was presented as part of Plant Lab in Whangarei in 2022 for AFI World. And this was more work that came out of that body of work. These pieces were made in Parihaka after I was at Whangarei. I do talk about my collaboration with Mata Wharihoka a little bit later, but this is when we came to Parihaka last year with the fabric that had been eco-dyed. We wove them into some kete that Mata had made a few years ago for a project called the Silence Puwanga. And in this project, the Silence Puwanga, we had made handmade books, and I'd made 9 handmade books which really responded to the 9 Norse worlds and really explored the runes and the stories that of Yggdrasil, and just touching on some of those ancestral stories from the Norse lands. And Marta's beautiful books explored Puwanga and some of the creation stories that resonated for her in this project, Māori creation stories. And this is my partner, Marty, assiduously weaving into these baskets. We also spent a fair bit of time learning new techniques last year. So this was a workshop we did with Rhonda Repke, who specialises in eco-dyeing. That was one workshop that we did, which was fabulous. This was the outcome of some of that, which really beautiful prints. We also did a shibori workshop, and what you're seeing here is in the grounds near the Bribie Island Arts Centre, so lovely bushland, which incidentally we'll be walking around as part of a guided meditation walk that I'll be facilitating later this year. So that was lots of fun. And also to have been involved in a number of weaving workshops, though I will be the first to say I'm a terrible weaver. And but what I love is how weaving is an opportunity to sit in a circle and have conversations. So it's weaving our stories together and our experience of the world together. This work here was part of what I did when I was in Whangarei earlier this year for BIOS, and this large piece of fabric, 3 different pieces of fabric have been layered with cyanotype, and that was pretty much what I played with for quite a bit of the time when I was over there earlier this year. So some of the initial imagery on this fabric was taken from plants from Bribie Island, and then the later ones were ones that from gathering plants in Whangarei. And here's some documentation of that process. So I mentioned earlier about, these walking meditations, and Tree Creative is the banner that those projects have happened under. And so a number of projects happened while I was still in Canberra, and as well as last year at Joondaburri Conservation Corridor. And they involved walking through the conservation corridor, usually with other knowledge holders. There's mindfulness meditation combined with spending time doing some creative activity. So this is one of the earlier walks. This one was from last year, and this beautiful red gum everyone's standing under, which is, at least 300 years old. So they were a number of walks that really started to shape a different way that I was exploring my practice. Talking to Trees was a project in 2021 at the Australian National Botanic Garden. And in that project, there was an augmented reality walk and also an exhibition in the exhibition space where I really focused on the rare and endangered plants in that collection. So the imagery that was in that exhibition was primarily to do with some of the rare plants. And that exhibition also had featured a walk where we played with the technology. Here's one of the images from there. So the Silence Puwanga, that is a project that is still potentially going. Mata Wharihoka, Akuia in Parihaka, and the kaumata of one of the Wharenui there. Her and I have been really talking for many years, but actively collaborating since 2019, where we first created the kete. This is a still from a video that we created, I think, in 2021. Another project that has relationship, especially around how trees and water and location and story can vary depending on where you're standing. And so Salix Wandering was a project, a collaboration between Faye Stevens, Joan Kelly and myself. And we looked at the role of the willow in all of our places. So Faye Stevens lives in the UK, where, the willow is seen as a very benevolent species and, one that provides precious resources, whereas for Joan and myself living in the east coast of Australia, the salix is seen as very invasive and a real problem. So that was a project where we ended up presenting a video, which was a collaboration between the 3 of us, and we presented at Goldsmiths as part of After Progress. So we're getting into the work that's really been happening since I've been living on the island. And Weaving Wetlands has been a bit of an umbrella title for that work. And you saw earlier some of the eco-dyeing efforts that have happened since then. So just a few more details of those. The other project that has been emerging, and really I'm at the very beginning stage of it, is called Passage. And the Pumicestone Passage is the body of water which separates the island from the mainland. But also Passage is a way of going from, it's a journey of initiation. It's passing from one realm into the next. It can be read in many different ways. And in the context of this body of work, it's very much drawing on the passage of one realm to the next. So the work is really also speaking to the recent loss of my father. So the image that you see in the background here is a cyanotype that's been created using some of the bereavement flowers that were gifted to me after he passed away. And here's a detail of some of the flowers and some more of the cyanotypes. Another one of the flowers. And some more of the cyanotypes. So this work is really just beginning, and I'm a little bit unsure how it will unfold, but that's sort of where it's at the moment. So I'd just like to, at this point, turn and talk about Weaving Water at Yarun, which is a project that I'm producing for later in the year, and it is a residency and symposium that will be hosted at Warrum on the coast side of the island. So I love this quote. It really does resonate. So it's not you trying to do the weaving. This country is trying to weave you. This whole continent is you. And that's a quote from Wanta Jempinja Pawu. So what is it all about? So basically it's a in-person and online art residency and symposium. And the goal is to create a space to explore Yarun Bribie Island and its environment, people and history. The objective of the project is to weave connection between the local community with the artists and scientists who are visiting. And these artists and scientists, many of them are internationally recognised for their work. The project will provide also opportunities for collaboration, knowledge sharing and capacity building locally, and also present to the public novel ways of highlighting the importance of Bribie Island's ecosystems as part of the broader Great Sandy System and strengthening its role as a marine and wildlife sanctuary. Our team, so our local team is Rebecca Thompson, Michelle Watson is our cultural advisor, and Taz Winkler is the administrative coordinator, and Martin Jury and myself are working locally. And and our remote team is Nina Segletti, who will be helping with the coordination of the virtual residency, and Crystal Clashing, who will be helping with the digital support. This little drawing Michelle Watson asked me to do, and I need to do another couple of drawings after sort of important meetings, and she asked me to create something that responded to how I'm seeing the residency. And I guess it's a flowering of ideas, and also it's a flow of the tides and the cycles of the moon, and hopefully it will be a way for us to sort of resonate and vibrate our energy out there into the world. So I'm hoping to build on this series of novel images as we get closer to the time. Our partners, the Pumicestone Indigenous Employment and Education Council, where Michelle Watson is the chair, Also the Bribie Island Environment Protection Association, and our Trans-Tasman partners are AFI World. And we're really excited to work with all of those partners. Some of our humans that are being involved, most of the humans here are people who are planning to come to the island. Really excited. We've got artists coming from and cultural knowledge holders coming from Vanuatu, the United States, Turkey, quite a strong contingent from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also interstate and locally. So we've really got a really great group of people who are going to come and play and weave some magic with us. We also have a number of public events. You know, these are in-person events. I don't have a lot on the virtual events at this point, but we will definitely be doing these following things. So we'll have a symposium, which will focus on art, science, climate adaptation, and environmental law. And there will also be a bus trip to the Queensland Museum and the Gallery of Modern Art, which will be hosted by Bianca Beetson, who's the Director of First Nations Engagement at Queensland Museum. And the thing that's fantastic about that is she's asked for me to find out, especially where all the First Nations people, where their particular tribe or iwi or hapu come from, and she will look for items in that collection that might have relevance for those particular groups. Also, too, there'll be a meet and greet at the Bribie Island Arts Centre, so that'll be on a Friday night. So, you know, cheese and bickies. There'll be a series of workshops at the Bribie Island Library and also on site at our venue, which is the Bribie Island Recreation Centre. And we'll also have an open day for artists to share knowledge and connect with the community. So here's a pic of the venue where we're staying at. It's just one street back from the beach and surrounded by beautiful bushland. So we're really hoping that people will be able to spend some time experiencing this place. And one of the things that we are doing is setting up a buddy system between the online and the in-person participants, so there can be an exchange of knowledge that will happen between the local places on Yarun and the places where the virtual participants are tuning in from. Our supporters, so we've been very fortunate to have some financial support through Moreton Bay Regional Council as part of the Regional Arts Development Fund, which is administered through Queensland Government. We've got the Australian Water Partnership, the University of Canberra. We've also got local supporters who I've mentioned, Intercreate, TurtleSat, Bribie Island Butterfly House, the Arts Centre, Peace, Beeper, and of course AFI World, Victory Press and Bribie Island Stationery. So if you want to find out more about the residency in particular, you can reach out to me. There's my email. You can also find out more on the website. And now I think it's time for a coffee. Thank you, everybody, and I hope the symposium goes well, and I'll talk to you another time. Thank you.